The consensus narrative is fixated on kinetic threats. Ukrainian drone strikes blacking out Russian-controlled grids. Political mobs hunting opponents in Minneapolis. These are tactical data points designed to draw your attention. They are loud. They are visible. They are a distraction. The strategic objective is not a high kinetic cost. It is systemic paralysis achieved through a vector you cannot see. They are not targeting your cities. They are targeting the global nervous system. The real war is being waged in absolute silence, 8,000 meters below the ocean's surface and 36,000 kilometers above it. CSIS and RUSI reports are unequivocal. The undersea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, the lifeblood of the global financial system, are indefensible. The satellites that provide GPS and secure military communications are exposed liabilities. The protocol is not to launch a missile. It is to cut a cable. Not to detonate a warhead, but to blind a satellite. This creates the ultimate asymmetric nightmare, the blind Leviathan. A superpower with thousands of nuclear warheads, carrier groups, and hypersonic platforms, but with no data, no swift transactions, no GPS guidance, no secure intelligence. Its strength becomes a stranded asset. A blinded state cannot calculate proportional response. It cannot trust its own sensors. Its launch-on-warning protocols are triggered by ambiguity, not certainty. The system is designed to interpret a total loss of signal not as a technical fault, but as the prelude to a decapitation strike. In this state of induced paranoia, the mathematical incentive to escalate, to restore dominance and solvency with overwhelming, non-negotiable force, approaches 1. The motive is not conquest. It is survival. We are witnessing a global solvency crisis where the very business model of the 20th century nation-state is being declared bankrupt. A state's solvency is not merely its treasury. It is its foundational ability to project power and maintain domestic order at a sustainable kinetic cost. When that cost exceeds the state's capacity, it is insolvent. Consider the Russian Federation. RUSI analysts have noted for months that the conventional phase of the Ukraine war became a catastrophic domestic liability. The expenditure in materiel, political capital, and manpower was unsustainable. The war was no longer an investment in strategic depth. It was a fire liquidating the core assets of the state. This is the definition of a solvency crisis. Forced weakness compels a pivot. When your symmetric advantage is nullified, you are forced to adopt the enemy's protocol. The relentless Ukrainian drone campaign, disabling power for hundreds of thousands in Russian-controlled territory, proved that low-cost vectors could inflict disproportionate systemic damage. Russia is now forced to find its own asymmetric leverage points against the West, because it can no longer afford the price of conventional warfare. This protocol is universal. It is the same logic used by NGO-funded mobs who declare a city like Minneapolis theirs. The strategy is not to win a direct confrontation, but to make the cost of maintaining order, of enforcing the writ of the state, prohibitively expensive. They attack the solvency of the system itself. Perceived weakness is the accelerant, forcing a launch-on-warning response to restore dominance before the entire system defaults. The core of the protocol is economic. The math is irrefutable. A Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, analysis quantifies the arbitrage. A $5 million main battle tank is systematically hunted and liquidated by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic execution. The kinetic cost for the attacker is near zero. The solvency risk for the defender is catastrophic. Every complex, expensive system, from an armored column to a power grid, has become a liability on a balance sheet, waiting to be written down by a cheap, distributed threat. This inversion of cost is termed the democratization of violence. The monopoly on effective state-level lethality has been broken. It is now open source. A weaker state actor can leverage commercial drone technology to neutralize the critical infrastructure of a superpower, as seen in Ukrainian strikes disabling Russian-controlled power grids. Domestically, the same principle applies with different vectors. Reports from Minneapolis detail NGO-funded mobs, a low-cost organic force, effectively claiming territory and neutralizing political opposition through coordinated physical assault. Lethality is no longer exclusively forged in state-owned factories. It is now assembled in garages and organized on encrypted messaging apps. The systemic risk is the response this economic reality triggers. When a nation's foundational military assets are rendered fiscally obsolete and its domestic order is challenged by low-cost vectors, its very model of power is insolvent. The established power cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy with near-zero kinetic cost. The mathematical incentive, therefore, is not to de-escalate. It is to escalate to a domain where the cost curve cannot be exploited, a launch-on-warning posture where perceived weakness becomes the primary accelerant for a non-symmetrical, overwhelming response. The vectors of attack are not random. They are tested, refined, and perfected. The question is not if, but where. The answer: in designated gray zones. These are regions of engineered instability, operating as proxy laboratories for the next generation of warfare. Examine Ukraine. The drone strikes disabling Russian power grids are not merely tactical wins. They are a live-fire demonstration of a low kinetic cost, high-leverage blueprint. For a minimal investment, a weaker actor can inflict a systemic shock on a larger power's critical infrastructure. This is a repeatable protocol, now field-proven and ready for export. Observe the domestic front. The events in Minneapolis are not protests. They are urban warfare trials. Mobs hunting political opponents and claiming territory are a test of the state's response latency and its monopoly on force. As seen with the Chaz experiment, these are exercises in establishing localized, non-state control, measuring precisely how much systemic stress the social fabric can withstand before it tears. The most potent gray zones are not geographical, but political and economic. A called-off strike against Iran is not a sign of peace. It is a public stress test of American and Israeli resolve, exposing liability. A political war against the Federal Reserve is not just rhetoric. It is a direct attack on the solvency of the system itself. This is why agencies like CSIS issue warnings about instability in nations like Canada. They are not identifying a cause. They are flagging the next laboratory. These proxy laboratories serve a single purpose: to perfect the asymmetric toolkit. The goal is to create so many systemic liabilities, kinetic, social, economic, that a major power is faced with a solvency crisis. Once its conventional dominance is proven null, the mathematical incentive to escalate to a launch-on-warning posture to restore credibility becomes a near certainty. The gray zones are where the matches are being tested, just before they're thrown into the powder keg. The core protocol of nuclear deterrence is not mutually assured destruction. That is the outcome. The mechanism is launch-on-warning. This doctrine is a mathematical function, not a human decision. Given the 30-minute flight time of an intercontinental ballistic missile, waiting for physical confirmation of impact means your own arsenal is destroyed in its silo. The system is therefore programmed to launch a retaliatory strike based on credible sensor data of an inbound attack, not impact. Data. This creates the system's single greatest liability. An adversary does not need to spend trillions on a rival missile system. They only need to manipulate the data. CSIS models refer to this as a sensor-level decapitation. Instead of a kinetic first strike, the vector is a low-cost, high-leverage cyber attack. We see the blueprint for this in other domains. Ukrainian drones targeting Russian power grids, as documented by Fox News, demonstrate the principle of attacking critical infrastructure with cheap, asymmetric tools. This triggers the fog of digital war. The command center is now blind. The early warning radar network is dark. The satellite feeds are non-responsive. The crucial question is no longer, are we under attack? The question becomes, is this blackout the attack itself? The absence of information becomes the most critical piece of information. The commander is now forced into a zero-sum calculation. The risk of not launching, assuming the silence precedes an imminent impact, is 100% national annihilation. The risk of launching, assuming it is a false alarm, is initiating global thermonuclear war. When the nation's very solvency is questioned, when its primary defense system is proven vulnerable, a perceived weakness identical to the dynamic reported by the Jerusalem Post, the mathematical incentive to escalate to restore certainty becomes overwhelming. The protocol is designed to default to launch. Perceived weakness is the primary accelerant. The protocol is being field-tested in real time. In Russian-controlled territory, Ukrainian drone strikes are used to test the failure threshold of civilian power grids. In Minneapolis, NGO-funded mobs test the kinetic cost required to seize urban territory and neutralize political opposition. These are not acts of war. They are data-gathering operations. Each event calibrates the exact amount of low-cost force required to trigger a high-cost systemic liability. Simultaneously, the system's response protocols are being probed. When the U.S. publicly calls off a kinetic strike, as documented by the Jerusalem Post, foreign actors do not register it as de-escalation. They register it as a critical vulnerability in the decision-making chain. When political actors declare war against the Federal Reserve, as reported by ecotks.com, it signals a fracture in the core pillar of economic sovereignty. These are signals of perceived weakness, the primary accelerant for escalation. The next data point will not be a proxy skirmish. It will be a direct, attribution-impossible calibration shot against core U.S. infrastructure. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a cascading, multi-day blackout impacting a primary Tier 1 data center corridor, such as those in Ashburn, Virginia. The event will be officially blamed on a software patch error or unprecedented solar activity. The attribution is a functional distraction. Its purpose is to measure the system's response to a decapitation of its data backbone, providing a final, terrifying baseline before a true solvency crisis is engineered.